At the beginning of this new year of 2022, with the rise of the number of people diagnosed with the Omicron variant, individuals in hospital, and the militant resistance of anti-vaxxers to inoculation, it would be easy to share the pessimism of those who see doomsday ahead, the everlasting intractable conditions of semi-lockdown, the uncertainty and paralyzing fear that govern how we are now leading our lives. And it is true that many of us are weary and burnt out by nearly 2 years of this pandemic, and filled with gloom by the possibility of another 1 or 2 or even 3 years of combating the strains of the coronavirus, or at least learning to live with it. But ironic though it may seem, and following the death of the Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Town, the Most Reverend Desmond Tutu, who died last Sunday, I was heartened by listening to a lecture given by him at Oxford University in 2010. He reflected on the grotesque injustice of apartheid, the crude methods used by the minority whites in power to classify the black population into separate nations. He spoke about the humiliation inflicted on black South Africans, how when he traveled abroad, his travel documents described his nationality as undeterminable at present. We were the lowest group in the classification of race in South Africa, he said. We had to laugh in order not to cry. He spoke of the moment when non-violence as a means to justice turned to armed struggle, when dignity and humanity were carelessly trodden underfoot. It was a costly racial bloodbath, he said, as he remembered the random drive-past shootings, massacres engineered by sinister forces, and the feeling of utter hopelessness. And in the middle of this lecture at Kellogg College in Oxford, he told that familiar story of the man driving up a winding mountain pass whose car overturns, and as he watches it hurl down the mountain, he manages to save himself and catch hold of a twig. "Help!" he cries. "Help! Is there anyone up there?" And a voice replies, "Yes." "Please save me." "Let go of the twig and I will catch you," says the voice. And the man cries, "Is there anyone else up there?" Desmond Tutu told this with a wide grin on his face, with a wheezy laugh and hunched shoulders, as though this past, this prejudice, the beatings, the massacres, the hostility and depredations of white power was an absurdity, a wheeze, that eventually was to come to an end on April the 27th, 1994, when, as he described, long lines of South Africans waited their turn to vote for the government they were to choose for themselves. If South Africa can become a beacon of hope, said the Archbishop Emeritus, there is no reason for change not to happen elsewhere. There is no longer anywhere in the world where the situation is intractable. Anything can be resolved with the help of the international community and with the idealism of young people. He cited the Troubles in Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, Ian Paisley seen on television joking and laughing with Martin McGuinness, two men from two sides of a lengthy, bitter divide. Although I do wonder what he would have to say today about those who feel they are currently in a state of limbo when it comes to identity, heritage, past and future in Ireland. Kerini Docherty's painful memoir, which I warmly recommend, which is called Thin Places, sees the hard-won peace now more endangered than it has been for years. We have no idea, she writes, what will come about for us if the Good Friday Agreement, the deal made in the 1990s that brought the worst of the Troubles to an end, is disrespected any further than it already has been. We learn from history that we don't learn from history, said Desmond Tutu in his lecture. Why are people so hell-bent in offering armed conflict rather than a reduction in their power and privilege? Are we so programmed, he asked, so wired that peace is only possible after strife? And having touched on the troubles of Northern Ireland, it was no surprise to me to hear him end his lecture by referring to what he called the unconscionable blockade of Gaza and the brinkmanship between Israel and Palestine. The penance for the Holocaust, he said, is being paid not by the West, not by those who were perpetrators or bystanders to the destruction of the Jewish people, but by the Palestinians. While he acknowledged Israel's right to sovereignty and defense of her civilians, and in many ways over years identified the oppression of his own people with the persecution of Jews, this semi-theological statement about penance, which requires unraveling an inquisition, leaves some questions for those who did not see him as a friend to the Jewish people or indeed to Israel. While he was honored in some quarters of the Jewish community, he was heavily criticized in others. He wasn't, after all, a man to mince his words or spare the sensitivities of others. The chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission believed in a moral universe where right and wrong matter. The commission, he said, revealed that we are capable of the most ghastly atrocities, performed not by monstrous individuals, but by ordinary human beings. There, but for the grace of God, go I, he said. If I had been subjected to the same conditions, would I have behaved in the same way? And yet, he concluded, human beings can display the most extraordinary magnanimity, ready to embrace in public. As he spoke of humanity's generosity of spirit, his language became more elevated, more religious. We are in the presence of something holy. We stand on holy ground and must take off our shoes. We are finite creatures who are made for the infinite, for the transcendent. And as much as human beings are made for the infinite, they are also made for each other. This, he said, is Ubuntu, a Zulu word which conveys the concept of being bound up together. I am because you are. Human beings are one family. The human being, he said, cannot exist, speak, or think on their own. I am because you are. I exist because you exist. This is a concept that echoes the famous Baraita in the Talmud, which states that Adam, the progenitor of all human beings, was created alone, so that no individual could argue, my ancestor is greater than yours. We are bound up in the bundle of life together, descended from one human being. Liberation theologians drew their inspiration not from the Christian Bible, but from the Torah, from the account of slavery and liberation that we will continue to read over the next few weeks. Remove your shoes from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. Desmond Tutu pursued the prophetic commission of Moses, breaking the yoke of oppression to release his people to freedom. There is something in us, he said, that refuses to be regarded as less than human. We are created for freedom. These accounts of liberation from slavery in Africa, whether north or south, remain an inspiration for all peoples oppressed by cruel and prejudiced overlords, whether the ancient narrative of Israel's exodus from Egypt long ago, or South Africa's liberation from white power less than 30 years ago. For as long as we remember and continue to tell these stories, there is hope that even the most intractable and oppressive regimes can be defeated, and all humanity attain the freedom for which they were all created. Amen.